You're listening to the Sisterhood of Limitless Living podcast. I'm your host, Dr. April Moreno. I'm a public health specialist focused on integrative wellness and autoimmune living, supporting the community of women, where I help you to live your best quality of life through being your best self-advocate. Let's get started. Welcome to the Sisterhood of Limitless Living. We are well into the 60s of the episodes, and I'm so excited. We've been here for over a year now, providing a space of community of multicultural women who are thriving despite their autoimmune conditions. It's been a beautiful experience. I've enjoyed every episode, every opportunity to reach out and connect with women around the world in various circumstances with various autoimmune conditions, and also those who are serving the autoimmune community. It's been a wonderful experience. And it's summertime now, so happy summer, sisterhood. And I hope you've all been taking good care of yourself with all the protective measures. You know, in the United States, there are still so many things that still need to be done to gain control of the pandemic that's out there. And yeah, it does affect us differently as well. We are more susceptible to the severities of this virus. So take good care of yourselves out there. We are often part of that immunocompromised population with the types of medications and therapies we're taking to help reduce disease progression with our various autoimmune conditions. So take really good care out there. Social distance, have the mask, keep your hands clean, wash your hands frequently, and continue to maintain that distance. You know, it's been hard because I know some of our relatives have actually been hanging out, driving past our neighborhood on their way to various locations, camping, doing things with RVs. And we haven't had the opportunity to say hello to them or see them. My mom had a birthday party just a couple weeks ago, and we've just been very strict about staying away from social events and staying at a distance from people. I know I'm one of the more strict people when it comes to protection against the virus, but as part of the autoimmune community, it's just so much better to take that abundance of caution. You know, I have another podcast. If you're not familiar with it, it's called COVID-19 Public Health Policy and Culture. I've recently had the opportunity to interview so many people since March, since I started this podcast, COVID-19 PPC, and talked to so many people about the various ways that countries have been dealing with the pandemic. We've talked to people in Europe, Asia, New Zealand, even Canada, about how the pandemic and the virus is being managed. This spread of the disease is serious stuff. It's no joke. And in the United States, we have such a long way to go when it comes to taking control of this virus. So if you're interested in learning more about that, check out anchor.fm/COVID-19PPC. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is in terms of self-care. It's just been a very interesting year. It started out pretty calm. You know, I was excited. We did some in-person events, did our multicultural integrative wellness workshop here in San Diego back in February. And since then, we haven't had a chance to get to meet people in person anymore. The recent protests for social justice and racial justice, in addition to the pandemic, it's just been a very stressful time. It's been a very eventful time. And if you're exhausted, I don't blame you. There has been a lot going on. And to maintain our health and wellness, that still has to always be central to everything we do, especially part of this community of autoimmune living. My friend Lydia and I put together a workshop that we are doing on July 1st to help to cultivate and grow the conversation, to grow and promote self-care with autoimmune conditions. Be sure to join us on July 1st when we guide you through an integrative and holistic health process so that you can create new routines for your health and wellness, for self-care, to reprioritize, to reflect on your self-care practice. We begin the workshop with a mindful assessment of your self-care. at the current moment. We end the workshop with another assessment of your self-care. And then throughout the workshop, we talk about approaches to nutrition, holistic health, mindfulness, and integrative wellness practices that you can adopt in your daily life to design a self-care practice that makes the best sense for you and your needs. So join us on July 1st for the workshop on self-care with autoimmune conditions. And you can RSVP at sisterhoodoflimitlessliving.com. We look forward to meeting you on July 1st to guide and build self-care for autoimmune women. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention our Patreon. We are growing the Patreon site, so do consider sponsoring us on Patreon or on Podbean as well. Podbean itself has this option where we can accept donations and sponsorships at as little as $1 a month. This will help us to increase our ability to grow the podcast, to increase the awareness and knowledge of the Sisterhood of Limitless Living, to get editing done. This is a one-woman show right now when it comes to producing this podcast. I'd love to find ways to connect with increasing the awareness of the sisterhood as a global, multicultural autoimmune podcast, and also to get some editing help done so that I don't have to worry about carpal tunnel so much anymore. It would be great to be able to do that. So we need your support. So please consider a donation on Podbean or consider Patreon, where we have some other really fun programs lined up. So let's get into this episode about the blue zones. This is one of my favorite topics. The autoimmune blue zone is something I have been thinking about for quite some time. We're going to go into this episode to talk about what a blue zone is, where these blue zones are located, and then we're going to talk about what the characteristics of these blue zones, what they've been so far, and then how we can create an autoimmune blue zone. With the Sisterhood of Limitless Living, a blue zone of integrative wellness is something that I've envisioned for quite some time. And today I'm really excited to get into this topic and share it with you, to share this concept of what an autoimmune blue zone can look like. First of all, what is a blue zone? So looking at some of these websites on blue zones, we can see that the founder of this bluezones.com, Dan Buettner, apparently the concept of blue zones grew out of the demographic work done by this article in the Journal of Experimental Gerontology. I guess I want to say first that the concept of the blue zones is essentially about how to live a long, healthy life. As scientists and researchers began this topic of understanding what a blue zone is, the ultimate reason for this was to talk about longevity and how long people can live compared to the estimated life expectancy, the general life expectancy around the world. So with the blue zones, we're finding these regions, and they're called in some cases longevity hotspots, where geographically these are places that people are living way longer than people in other parts of the world. So that's basically what a blue zone is. These are regions where people have been known to live as part of communities where they're living way beyond the typical lifespan compared to the rest of the world. And that's really, for the most part, what the blue zone is. But then as you begin to zoom in, you'll start to see certain characteristics of these blue zones, which we'll be talking about today. And what is so interesting, particularly about blue zones, is that there are no specific characteristics. They are somewhat variable. There are some themes such as community. We'll go into a little bit more, but for the most part, the different factors that comprise a specific blue zone is different in one geographic area compared to the other. Let's go into where these blue zones are located. So next, I want to talk about where these blue zones are. So one of them is Sardinia, Italy. Another one is Okinawa, Japan. Another one is Costa Rica itself as a country. One other one is this region in Greece called Icaria. And then there's one here in California in Loma Linda, the city of Loma Linda. So I can tell you a little bit in more detail when it comes to a couple of these. I can tell you in a little less detail and more generally about the others. So more specifically at the moment, I would like to share with you some of the characteristics of the blue zone of Loma Linda and Okinawa. So the city of Loma Linda is part of Southern California. It's in the Inland Empire. And for the most part, this is a region that's known for not the greatest health outcomes. But when it comes to this area of Loma Linda, surprisingly, people have longer lifespans compared to the rest of the population in the region. And there are some specific commonalities among this population. It's estimated at about 24,000 people. It's in San Bernardino County, very much known as a place where there's a lot of challenges with health outcomes. It's a place where there's not very high socioeconomic status. It's a place where there's a lot of disparities, to be honest with you. But for specific reasons, Loma Linda is known as a blue zone. So what does this area have in common? In this particular blue zone, it is to do with being Seventh-day Adventists. This is a region where there's also decent education. There's a university, Loma Linda University, which is also a Seventh-day Adventist university. And so I would say that there's a high literacy of health, but also what is specific about Seventh-day Adventists is that they're known to focus on plant-based diets and also no caffeine and no alcohol. In this particular community of the Blue Zone, in this region, not eating meat, not drinking alcohol, and avoiding caffeine has helped them, in addition to this community cohesion, to become one of the Blue Zones where people live much longer lives. So basically in North America, these are people that are living some of the longest numbers of years. So that's one location. I guess I want to clarify that it is possible to be plant-based and not necessarily vegetarian. So I would like to say that this region is known to be plant-based. I've met Seventh-day Adventists in the area who are more vegetarian, but it may not necessarily be specific to vegetarianism, but also definitely more plant-based of a diet, but also the fact that there is a strong sense of community. The next one I want to talk about is Okinawa. So Okinawa is known for people who live way over 100, but these are people who do eat meat. Some of the Okinawan food includes pig's feet. And similarly in Okinawa, they do rely on a plant-based diet as well. However, they are known to eat pig's feet. So I've spent 6 years in Tokyo, and when we talk about Okinawa, we talk about things like goya, a certain kind of vegetable that has like a bitter taste. And then we talk about pig's feet. But in Okinawa, people do live into the hundreds often. So some of those characteristics are also about social support, once again, and having a lifelong set of friendships. So Okinawa is a really interesting place because, as you know, if you're part of the United States, we know that Okinawa is a place where there's a military base. So there is that part of the islands, but then also it's known to be a place where there's a lot of nature, a lot of connection to the ocean. So social connectedness and longevity seem to be very strong themes as part of what it takes to be a blue zone. So more generally speaking, I've never been to Costa Rica, but I can tell you that my grandmother went. She would not stop talking about it. And so apparently this peninsula, the Nicoya Peninsula in particular in Costa Rica, it's known to be a blue zone. And there are a lot of people who are in their hundreds, they're in good health, and it's considered one of the happiest places of Central America. And a lot of this stuff that I'm telling you comes from this bluezones.com website, but also some of it does come from articles in research. So here, when I talked about the fact that there's a blue zone in Sardinia, that one is from the Journal of Experimental Gerontology, volume 39, 2004, Poulain, Pest, and Grassland et al. That defines the blue zones as a place where longevity is higher than other parts of the world. And then these longevity hotspots that I mentioned as well are from that article. But for another episode, which I mentioned before as well, happiness may or may not be connected to longevity. You may not have to live into your hundreds to have a happy life. And that's a somewhat different concept. This is a topic I love to address as well. For example, in the nation of Bhutan, Their assessment is called gross national happiness, and that'll be another topic. And it is connected because in Costa Rica, this particular peninsula, Nicoya, is known also to be one of the happiest places in the world, which is beautiful. Happiness is great. May or may not have to live 100 years to be happy, have a happy life, but that's another topic for another time. Now we're going to get into this connecting theme across all of the blue zones. And that connecting theme is social cohesion. And in particular with Costa Rica, a lot of it has to do with connections with extended family. In this particular article, it says research shows that 30% of longevity comes from genes and the remaining 70% from lifestyle. And this is actually what I really want to talk about today as well. 70%, if this is true, because this is from troposphere.com. Let me go into PubMed. I talked about this in a past video and I haven't uploaded it into this podcast yet, but it needs to be an upcoming episode on how to access medical information and scientific information. So I do have an entire episode ready for that. Take a look at PubMed related to the science of longevity, lifestyle, and the blue zones. Okay, so blue zones, according to this article here, Poulain, Vienna Yearbook of Population Research. Blue zone populations are geographically and or historically isolated places for the most part. They tend to be islands and mountainous regions. Loma Linda is not geographically isolated as much as it is more to do with a religious community. So it is different in that way. It's distinct in that way. These populations succeed, according to this article, in maintaining a traditional lifestyle, implying an intense physical activity that extends beyond the age of 80, reduced levels of stress, and also intensive family and community support for their oldest population, and also their consumption of locally produced foods. So these are pretty much the factors that they've identified as part of what makes up a blue zone. This is from the Austrian Academy of Sciences Press, the Blue Zones, Poulain, Herman, Pess, 2013, Yearbook of Population Research. And then if we look into another one, these are actually written, Buettner, this is the actual person who has bluezones.com, so you're not going to find conflicting information. So he is also apparently a researcher, and he led a National Geographic expedition about the secrets of longevity. So that's kind of how he became known with his research and his work about the blue zones. So he had worked together with demographers, people who study demographics, and anthropologists, and they identified these 9 commonalities for blue zones. So I love this article because they've just broken it down. It's called American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine, 2016. With their National Geographic expedition, Dan Buettner and his team identify these 9 factors that comprise the blue zones. And so I'm going to go ahead and go through them with you. And then we're going to talk about how we can have an autoimmune blue zone, how we can do this so that we can live the longest possible life with wellness, happiness, and community cohesion. So the first one that they talked about is moving naturally. And I will attest to this. Being able to move naturally. The healthiest people, according to them, are people who live in environments that help them move naturally without forced exercise. Naturally, as part of their daily experiences, they work on things like gardening, housework, yard work, and then their walks, things like that, where it's like natural to be constantly moving. I will tell you, I used to live in Japan from 2000 to 2006, and I was in the best health of my life, and I didn't even have to think about it. I was so happy over there. In Japan, it was very commonplace to be walking everywhere. In Tokyo, for example, you're constantly walking wherever you need to go. None of my friends owned a car. I didn't own a car. I didn't drive for 6 years, but all of the walking and all of the opportunities for social connection were so wonderful. I just lost weight without even thinking about it. So moving naturally, opportunities to do that are the first thing. The second one is purpose. Ikigai is a Japanese word for purpose for life, drive for life, plan de vida, Costa Rica. Pretty much why I wake up in the morning. And knowing what your sense of purpose is can help so much. Apparently, it's worth up to 7 years of life expectancy, according to this study. Downshift. People in the blue zones have stress, but they know how to get out of it, to reduce the stress. It can be through napping, prayer, happy hour. For example, in Sardinia, these are things that they've identified. Okinawans take a few moments each day to remember their ancestors, it says. And then the next one is the 80% rule. This is also something I learned in Japan as well. The hara hachibu, that means pretty much 8/10 of your stomach contents. So hara hachibu is about 2,500 years old apparently, and it's something that in Okinawa they say before their meal. And I was also told to do the same. Don't eat till you're 100% full, eat till you're about 80% full, because after a few minutes you will feel it. It starts to fill up the rest of your body. Apparently, this is the difference between losing weight or gaining weight. People in blue zones eat the smallest meal in the late afternoon and early evening, and then they don't eat anymore for the rest of the day. And then the fifth one is about having a plant-based diet. Beans as a cornerstone of most of the diets of people who live into their hundreds in these areas. There's meat, there's pork, eaten on average about 5 times a month. Serving sizes of meat are pretty small. They've noticed 3 to 4 ounces. And then the sixth one is pretty cool. It's wine. So in all the blue zones except for Loma Linda, drink alcohol moderately and regularly. This is so interesting because they have outlived non-drinkers. So 1 to 2 glasses per day of wine, for example, with friends and with food. Isn't that beautiful? It sounds like so much fun. And then number 7 is this sense of belonging. For the most part, the majority of the people they interviewed who were over 100 belong to some faith-based community. So any sort of faith-based community seemed to help so much. In Japan, it would be Buddhism or Shintoism. And then in other countries, it's Catholicism. It's Seventh-day Adventism, but having a faith-based belief system has helped so much. And then also a sense of belonging based on that faith-based community. And then the next one is on loved ones first. They put their families first. Keeping aging parents and grandparents nearby or in the home helps the elderly to live longer lives. They commit to their life partner, which adds 3 years of life expectancy. And then they also invest in time with their children. So the 8 out of 9 factor that they identified was this focus on spending time with loved ones. If you're in your hundreds, living alone and isolated in a home may not be ideal. Being cared for by the younger generations, and also having a life partner. And then the 9th one that they identified was that they are part of these social circles that support healthy behaviors. And I would kind of clump some of these together. If we talked about belonging, that's one thing. And then over here, you have the 9th one here is where they're working together in social circles that support healthy behaviors. So basically, number 9 is the one that seals it all together. They're living in these communities and then they're sticking together in terms of wellness. I'm going to include a link to this article, which is awesome, in the show notes. So basically, those are the factors. If I were to simplify it, I would say again that it has a lot to do with community cohesion. It has to do with having a plant-based diet where you're eating frequent beans and vegetables and things that are plant-based. Time for stress reduction, having a faith-based practice, and then wine. Time to have a drink or 2 of wine per day with friends and with food. So that is what a blue zone is in detail, in depth. Now I want to talk about how can it be possible for us to have an autoimmune blue zone, but even further, how we can have a blue zone that is not limited to geographic space. So there's 2 things I'm trying to put together here that are not part of this concept, but I present this question. Is it possible for us to have an autoimmune blue zone? I believe that yes, it is. And what it's going to specifically look like, we may actually have various versions of that. We may have these various different blue zones across the world and what it looks like. But I propose that it be linked to 4 main domains of integrative wellness. And the 4th one is always very different in my space of public health compared to other coaches and practitioners of integrative health that often focus in on mind, body, spirit, and emotion. The 4th one, instead of emotion, with public health as a backdrop, would be environment. So mind, body, spirit, and environment. If we were to address a blue zone, the design of an autoimmune blue zone, regardless of geographic space, what that would look like. This is the question I have for you. This is what I envision. So in terms of mind, that would be a place of whether it be religious or connection to a higher power, crucial. Another practice, relaxation, mindfulness, meditation, and visualization. And then also in terms of mind, the capability to believe in your health and wellness, self-efficacy, would be part of that major domain. So these would be 3 major characteristics if I were to design an autoimmune blue zone. In terms of body, a blue zone for body, for physical wellness, would involve regular communication with your physician, your specialist. It would involve awareness of your diet, proactive design of a diet that works best for you, time for movement and exercise on a daily basis, and maybe a consistent basis if possible, a regular routine that involves yoga, some sort of walking movement, something that raises the heart rate, maybe 2 or 3 times per day, maybe a morning, noon, and night physical regimen. In terms of spirit, this would involve that connection again, which I mentioned in mind, that connection to the higher power, but also a community who also believe and follow those same practices. And then environment. Environment is the one that I say is the all-encompassing, the one that seals it all. Environment has so much to do with the people you spend time with, the quality of the air, the noise, the safety, the access to healthy foods and resources, and all the different needs, the different tangible things that you're going to need, and also the different sensory needs that you're going to have met as part of a healthy environment for wellness. I don't know exactly what the autoimmune blue zone would specifically look like, because there may be more than one way to do this, and I think there obviously should be. Even as you look at these different blue zones across the world, Sardinia, Ikaria, Okinawa, Nicoya, Loma Linda, you will see variabilities in what makes up a blue zone. An autoimmune blue zone is something I envision which is slightly different. I don't know how long we're going to live. I don't know if all of us will live past 100, and I really hope so. I choose to believe that it is possible. I know that some of us with certain conditions have seen the literature, and it's supposed to have like shortened life by 5 to 7 years in some cases, but I choose to believe that it's possible. Autoimmune blue zones would incorporate a portion of stress reduction for sure. It would incorporate anti-inflammatory foods. It would incorporate sunlight, vitamin D, temperatures that are temperate, not too hot, not too cold, unless you are a lover of these types of climates. And also, it would also involve some sort of modified exercise practice based on your needs. So these are the factors I can think of when it comes to designing an autoimmune blue zone. So the autoimmune blue zone doesn't have geographic space. The autoimmune blue zone is where we connect here on the podcast, I envision, and also in person after the pandemic with conferences and events and networking, but also places where that autoimmune blue zone occurs from within. So this is the first iteration of this conversation of the design of the autoimmune blue zone. And I would love to hear what you think about the concept of blue zones and how it can be made possible for people with autoimmune conditions to live long, healthy, socially cohesive, positive lives, maybe even with a glass of wine, connecting to our higher sense of purpose, ikigai, el plan de vida. What does this look like for you? This is what I'm envisioning for the Sisterhood of Limitless Living. I want us to be a space for conversation as an autoimmune blue zone. So count us in. In this episode, I hope that you've enjoyed learning about what the blue zones are, hearing more in detail about the different regions of the world that are known, where people live well over 100, numerous cases, numerous examples, and what those factors are, and how we can adapt those factors into our own lives for autoimmune wellness. Thank you for listening. And until next episode, hope you're enjoying your summer.